Hey gang, we are in Maine. We are in York, Maine, York Village Cemetery here. Very small cemetery. Some call it Old York. Want to shout out Michael Lacey, who wrote me a long time ago. He's really into this story. He has a lot of knowledge on it. So we've been communicating. And the story is about a witch, Mary Nasson. Kind of a famous story here. So let's take a walk. It's a very small cemetery, so we're not going to be able to see a lot, but we'll probably spend a lot of time at her grave, which is definitely a grave worth seeing. It's quite a unique and interesting headstone. Very historic area for our country. York was established by the Europeans in 1624. Can you imagine? 1624. And when you see, I've been in some of the states here in New England now, last year in Vermont, and these are the kind of stones, these slate, dark slate stones are indicative of what you see here a lot, and they hold up really, really well. And look at that carving of the skull. Here lies Hannah Moulton. So some really good stuff here. We're going back in time, that is for sure. It was just a few months before the opening battles of the War of our Independence here. And this is a young woman who died here, this town of York Village, this Mary Nasson. Her grave is known as the Witch's Grave here, and it is reported to be haunted. Now, she was 29 years old when she died. Her maiden name was Mary Shores. She was a native here of New Hampshire, of course, right across the state border, and she had been the mother of 5 children, and that included a set of twins. Now, her husband was a saddler, and he sold horse furnishings and advertised his business in the pages of the Portsmouth newspaper. I just came from Portsmouth, actually, doing the story of the Smutty Nose murders. His name was Samuel Nasson, and they were doing pretty well. So Mary Nasson died close to 80 years after the Salem witch trials of 1692. And she did have some rather interesting connections. There were 3 that I found. She was connected to the grandson of an accused witch, a Salem witch accuser, and the kindred of one of the Salem witch trial judges. We'll start with the grandson of the witch accuser, his name Jonathan Sayward. He was a Revolutionary Era loyalist. Again, when we say loyalist, we're talking about loyal to England, the king. And he was under suspicion in April 1775 as a friend and correspondent of Governor Thomas Hutchinson. He was also the grandson of Samuel Weber, who was to accuse the Reverend George Burroughs of supernatural physical powers there. And Weber said he had witnessed Burroughs, the Wells minister, who, by the way, was hanged as a witch in August of 1692. It said he put his fingers into the bung of a barrel of molasses and lifted it up. That's what he said. And here we have another skull. Look at that. All very similar. Secondly, the grandson connection of an accused witch, the Reverend Samuel Moody, who was the grandson of accused witch Mary Bradbury. Though she was imprisoned for the crime and taken into custody in May 1692, she ended up surviving the trials. And third, as I mentioned, the kindred of one of the Salem witch trials judges. The witch judge of 1692, Samuel Sewell, who referred to Reverend Moody, married to one of his brother's daughters as Cousin Moody. Now, the Sewells of New York, who first arrived here early in the 18th century, the 1700s, from the town of Newbury, were the kindred of Samuel Sewell. And the gravestones of Sewells and Moody's are here, adjacent to one another, as they were kindred. Can you spot their grave as we walk along? Again, the faces on top, not the skull. And it's interesting to note, look at the eyes and look at the nose. Why a nose like that? It's almost like Kilroy was here. By the way, I'm going to do his story. Down on Cape Cod, he's around Cape Cod. So those are the connections. Now, we're making our way over to Mary's grave site over here. And she's had this mystique since the 19th century. Within a few years before her death in 1774, certain details reveal the life of her family. Quote, to Samuel Nasson in full for the rent of a room in his house for the widow Beals. This was an entry from one of the yellowed pages of the constable's book for the years 1773 and 1774. Now in 1769, there's also a record of an acquisition, and again we're talking about the family and the records and the tie-ins. There was an acquisition of a pew in the gallery of the First Parish Meeting House from its former owner, the barber Robert Rose. And they had found out a year later a deed for the purchase of a house and land from a John Johnson. Now here's an interesting stone in memory of M. Elizabeth, wife of David Hyslop of Brookline. So that would be Brookline, Massachusetts. She died suddenly when on a visit to her friends, and that would be on June 1808. She was 46 years old. And there is a little epitaph there. She needs no storied urn to record her worth, for she lives in the memory of those who loved her and who mourn her loss. Very interesting. You gotta love these stones. And again here, this one, Eunice Stone. We have the skull again on top. God, these are fantastic stones. She, well, no pun intended, Eunice Stone was 37 years old, 1765. Boy, oh boy, we are, look at the condition of the stone for how old that is. Just amazing. So getting back to Mary Nasson, she was a successful and respected herbalist in the community. She was also skilled at performing exorcisms. And we're going to see her stone, this carved portrait like we've been seeing on top of a lot of these stones, they're usually just images, but in hers it is said that it is in the effigy, or it's said to be her portrait. Legend states that Mary was a witch and was executed. The large stone slab that we're going to see is supposed to emit heat. So let's go over there and let's see this large stone that we're talking about. It is all by itself right here. And it's quite interesting. Now the first thing I notice is the stone is facing the other way. We're going to take a look at that. And there's a lot of money and all kinds of stuff on here, but that is the back of the stone. Now this slab here, it looks to be, could be original. There's like a footstone here. Or actually that could have been a smaller headstone, or maybe where the original headstone was, I don't know. But there's supposed to be heat coming up. Now the legend goes that this slab here was put here to keep her from crawling out. You know, I have to laugh because these stories, I mean, we love these stories, but Mary's husband Samuel had erected this headstone and that footstone, and then placed this slab really to keep the cattle away, most probably. That's probably the reason. And there is the carving, the famous carving. That is just stunning. Look at that. This is the only one of its kind, this whole setup here in the entire cemetery. There is an inscription that's rather interesting. It says, "Here lies quite free from life distressing care, a loving wife, a tender parent dear, cut down in midst of days, as you may see, but stop, my grief, I soon shall equal be. When death shall stop my breath and end my time, God grant my dust may mingle then with thine." And at the bottom it says, "Sacred to the memory of Mary Nasson, wife of Samuel Nasson, who departed this life August 28th, 1774, AE Tat 29. Some of that is illegible, but I think you can clearly read a lot of that. But I think what is most haunting is this. This almost reminds me, just standing here a little bit, when Marie Laveau in New Orleans, and I don't know why, I think it's the headdress or the hairstyle, whatever that is. She's got a shawl, and you just have to wonder what is that modeled after. It almost looks like mixed race also. If I were to, I'm probably over-interpreting it, but it just reminds me of New Orleans, which we were at last year. We're going to be back there. So yeah, there it is, guys. What an interesting grave. So Michael, you know, we had some conversations and emails, and just a few thoughts from him. He's really in depth on this. He said he noticed that she's buried all alone here. Of course, we mentioned that. Is it just a coincidence, or did the congregation, which were the Puritans at the time, not allow her to be buried with the rest of the community? I wonder about that. I have a feeling she was buried earlier, and maybe that legend started earlier and they started putting the new graves, but we'd have to look at the dates. But isn't that interesting, the Puritans, right? Wow, it just shows you how far back we're going. And I know you people here locally are laughing at me. Like, haven't you seen an old grave before? No, I'm from Chicago. 1800s is an old grave, guys. Breathe through your nose. I can't breathe through my nose. I'm excited about this. Michael also said he was wondering if she was an outcast for her time. Was she really a witch? Where's her husband? Well, I did look that up, Michael. Her husband is not here. He's at Oakdale Cemetery in nearby Sanford, also here in York County. And Michael was also saying, I wonder where her children are. And I did check that out. Son Peter and sister Susanna and Harriet Matilda are at Oakdale with their father. Sister Mary is at Maple Ridge Cemetery in Harrison, which is over in Cumberland County. But I ask, who was the fifth child? Michael was musing about the headstone carving and the writing. Michael calls this, I guess the proper term is a wolf slab. And Michael also made a good point to mention about her husband. I mean, he was a successful businessman. He sold horse saddles and furnishings. Why such a modest, unlikely grave? We saw the witch Bessie Elizabeth in Tallahassee, and you saw the monument she got. She died very young, close to the same age. Well, I don't know that we're ever going to know the answer to these questions. I don't think we're going to know. But we will leave her a flower right there. We pay our respects here to this woman. I don't think she was a witch, guys, but you know, legend's legend. We got to go with it. It's always a good story, that's for sure, at the very least. Rest in peace, Mary Nasson and all the Nassons. Rest in peace.